The start of free agency is just 1 month away. The Dolphins have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of ground to cover to get ready for possible signings.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Special thank you to each and every one of you who have helped to make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are on. There's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. It's an awkward intersection because the Super Bowl just wrapped last night, and round of applause for the Seattle Seahawks. Smoking the Pats. That was a very enjoyable watch. But we now have 1 month to the day until the legal tampering period opens. And there's a week where there's the NFL Combine in there. So we kind of have like this hurry up and wait type situation where we're in a dead period, but there's a lot of things that can happen. There's a lot of things that need to happen for a deadline that starts in 30 days or in 1 month from today, right? So it's going to be a flurry. You're going to blink and it's going to be free agency in the start of the league year. Now, the Dolphins and expectations in free agency are going to be pretty small, right? Like they're not going to have a ton of spending power. They do have to make decisions on several fronts, including Bradley Chubb and Austin Jackson and James Daniels and Minkah Fitzpatrick and Tyreek Hill, but there's no decision to be made there. Tua Tagovailoa, how do you want to handle that situation? That salary is guaranteed. Do you want to prolong your chances of potentially finding a trade, which has been reported that's what the Dolphins are interested in? If that's the case, do you manipulate his contract in any way to have more operating space? And then if you get to June and July and you don't have a market, you choose to keep him for the year, or you can choose to move on as a cut that happens after June 1st and split the dead cap. Like there's a lot of things. Plus there's also trimming of other potential veterans on the roster. Like what's going to happen with Jason Sanders? It's $4 million in cap space, right? And right now the Dolphins, cap space is at a premium and they need to get healthier for the long-term outlook, but that can be achieved in the next month, depending on what they choose to do with some of their personnel. You know, if you slash the cash, even if your cap debts are going to be what they're going to be, you can't change that overnight. Now you can eliminate certain cash budget for this year to reduce your debt moving forward. And that tipping of the scales is how the Dolphins are going to find themselves in a healthier place for this conversation next year. But the Dolphins are still going to presumably be tacking on some players. You know, I don't think this is we're not going to sign anybody in free agency. We're just going to do a draft. We'll sign a few players to minimum salaries in the summertime and we'll push play. Like, I have a hard time envisioning a new regime coming in and looking to instill a new offense or a new defense and wanting to put their imprint on the roster. I have a hard time imagining that it's going to be that universal. We're not signing anybody right now. They might not sign anybody of significance. I know there's a whole bunch of speculation around Malik Willis as a potential free agent target, and it's very feasible and easy for the Dolphins to go about doing that if they want to do that, assuming the price point doesn't get too crazy, right? If it's in the 20s, it's very easily attainable in a swing that the Dolphins could take, even with their cap situation being what it is, because players don't sign for just a blanket dollar amount that their cap is going to match what they get paid in cash in any given year. But there is going to be an influx because they're losing so many players, right? It's like 25 players. A few of them are probably going to be needle-moving signings as far as like not veteran minimum players, but I don't think they're going to be splash, and I don't think they're going to be top-of-market signings. I don't even think they're going to be like the $10 million varieties. Maybe you get one of that player if you go for the quarterback with Malik Willis. But if it's everything else, it might be a few like $3-4 million. Like, do they bring back Kader Kohu on a $3 million? Like last year, he was going to play for $3 million, 3.2, and then he tore his ACL in training camp. You bring him back for 3, 2.5. Like, those are the kinds of signings that I think we need to be prepared for this team to take, because I think you can sign a couple players that could end up being starters for you in that regard, and not lose a bunch of cap space because they already have a 51 filled up, right? Their cap situation, until they start making changes, it's bottomed out for now. It will never be as low as what it is right now, because they're minus 20 something million against the cap, but then they'll move on from Tyreek Hill and they'll be as close to break even or break even. They'll make all their other moves. They'll still have 51 players. So I want to start with DBs, because Jeff Hafley is a defensive coach, defensive backs coach by trade. What we know about Jeff Hafley, and then it's kind of presenting some names at both cornerback and safety that are currently set to hit free agency. We'll also acknowledge Over the Cap did a look at players who could be cap casualties. Do any of those make sense for the Dolphins? We'll get into all that. So let's start with Jeff Hafley. The safeties in Green Bay were the straw that stirred the drink in the secondary. That includes 2024 and 2025. It was Xavier McKinney was a splash signing in free agency. They drafted Von Bullard in the second round. They also draft Evan Williams in the fourth round out of Oregon. And those three really remade that safety room overnight. It gave them a ton of versatility, guys that could play down low, play on the second level, play in the slot, and play deep, right? That was, when you're looking for safeties that fit, what the Packers did. If he's going to try to emulate that, players with versatility, a la Minkah Fitzpatrick, a la Xavier McKinney, those are the kinds of names that I think you have to soft circle. Now, it's another conversation altogether about finding those players, right? Like, and finding players that are cost-effective swings of the bat, or could potentially be that, but maybe they were pigeonholed or their opportunity didn't allow to do X, Y, or Z. At corner, Jeff Hafley's talked in the past about really liking physicality and disruptiveness and interrupting the timing of routes. It is kind of a shot in the dark right now, but I think you do look at who the Dolphins have. Storm Duck is at his best in press. Juju Brents is a really big physical player. Rasul Douglas was very impactful in playing press coverage as well. Do they choose to bring him back on a one-year deal, as counting as one of those like $2 or $3 million free agent signings? He played for $1.5 million last year. Do you bring him back as the vet in the room? He used to play in Green Bay with John Eric Sullivan was there, right? So you try to tie together some connections. Maybe that makes some sense. But it is a little bit of I don't want to say guesswork, but it's educated guesses. This is the downside. It's a blessing and a curse about doing content with a team that is starting over, is with the McDaniel system. And then you educate on the Fangio scheme, and you educate on the sim pressure McDonald scheme that Anthony Weaver aspired to bring here. It was a little bit easier to have a predictive modeling for the kinds of players that mattered. And we can do that on offense still for the Dolphins, but defensively, like it's a little bit of guesswork. Like, here's the things we think are important to them. Here's the things that really move the needle in Green Bay. Make an educated guess, or make an educated forecast on the kinds of players that matter. And then we'll see what reports we end up getting on players that they are potentially interested in and put bids on and potentially sign. So don't expect to hear a lot of names at the top of the economic pyramid, right? There's not a lot of 1 and 5 percenters here. This is, let's say, the middle class of your roster is probably where the Dolphins are going to do a lot of work, I would guess. Because you could get those players for a few $1 million, and then your cap charges are not a runaway freight train, like has been the case with Miami in recent years. So we're going to go corners first, and I've got my list up here of over the cap and free agent schedules and potential cap casualties. We'll get into those names next. Make sure you guys stick with us. Winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like me, you're locking in for events there you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the winter games on FanDuel, this makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sport you care the most about, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected with the action. The drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast, speed skating races decided by inches and milliseconds, hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. That's where my bread's buttered, really, is the international hockey scene. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Here's the thing about the projected or the over the cap, like cap casualties. It's a lot of guys that are making a lot of money, which if they're expecting to be in that economic price point moving forward, it's going to be an automatic disqualifier for the Dolphins, like L'Jarius Sneed, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jalen Johnson, Christian Fulton, Marshawn Lattimore, Marlon Humphrey, Denzel Ward. These are cap casualty candidates. Not saying they're going to get cut. I wouldn't expect the Dolphins to play in this end of the pool. And most of these guys are 29 and older, right? Like, that's not really where you want to go as a team, right? Like, you're looking for potentially an upside play. You're looking for potentially a long-term payoff. You're looking for somebody who cannot just be a patchwork for 2026. So when I flip over and I look at cornerbacks that are scheduled to be free agents, I like to look by age. And there's a number of unrestricted free agents that are going to be entering into their age 25 season. That includes Cordell Flott from the Giants, Kaiir Elam from the Tennessee Titans, who was with the Bills, and then it didn't work out. There's some restricted free agents that are of interest, but you're probably at the mercy of those players getting a tender, or a restricted free agent tender by their team and being back. 26 years old, there's some interesting guys: Greg Newsome, Roger McCreary, Martin Emerson, who flashed early with the Browns. That's the kind of like size profile that and physicality profile that I certainly think meets what Jeff Hafley's talked about aspiring to have with his corners. I think, Greg Newsome was former first-round pick, played with under Jim Schwartz. That's a really aggressive, man-heavy scheme. Right now, he's predominantly a nickel. Do you trust him to play inside, outside? What's the projection for a contract there? Does his draft pedigree put him in a price point that's going to not be in the end of the pool that you can play in? Possibly. Roger McCreary kind of fell off. I'd be interested if he's not the biggest guy, but he was really good coming out of Auburn and playing like press and man technique. If that's the route that they want to go, and McCreary, who got traded at the trade deadline from the Titans to the Rams, played 32% of snaps this past season. If he's somebody that finds himself with kind of like a flat market, I think that's exactly the kind of player that I would like to see them kind of take a swing on and bring in. So those are all 26 or 25 years old. Flott, Elam, Newsome, McCreary, Emerson. I think the most attractive name is McCreary, assuming Newsome's priced out of what the Dolphins are willing to go to. I think the one that could be the best application of what Hafley's talked about out of that group is probably Martin Emerson, who also played in the man-heavy scheme there with Jim Schwartz, as we said. So him and McCreary in that experience playing man coverage, and Newsome. You go to the age 27 guys. Eric Stokes is a name to know because he was drafted in the first round by the Packers. Right now, they let him go, but he went to the Raiders and played 92% of the snaps last year on a $3.5 million deal. I think anything north of 3.5 is probably pushing it for what you could expect the Dolphins to have an appetite to do, just because it is probably going to be one of those years where you're not going to stick a ton of void years on the back end of contracts, right? You're not going to sign a guy to a 1-year deal, the Zach Wilson thing. They signed Zach Wilson to a 1-year contract worth up to $10 million, but the base was $6 million, but they put 4 void years on the back of it and put as much of it into a signing bonus as possible. And now the Dolphins are going to have a $3.8 million dead cap charge for 2026 to have Zach Wilson lose out the backup starting quarterback job by the end of the season to Quinn Ewers, right? Like, I don't see a lot of that strategy making sense for the Dolphins this year. Now, I think there's ways you can responsibly use void years, but doing it on every free agent signing that you put pen to paper with is not, I would not qualify that as being smart, responsible, and economically savvy, right? I will spare you the risk of entertaining the name Noah Igbenogany, even though he is set to be a free agent. A hard pass for me on that one. Cam Taylor-Britt, cornerback with the Cincinnati Bengals, former second-round pick. He was top 100 pick. Age 27 season. There's some off-the-field stuff there that I think is probably going to hurt his outlook and his profile for being somebody that the Dolphins will want to bring in year one with a new regime. And it was like a hit-and-run incident that he was wrapped up in. So I would expect he's an interesting name. He's played a lot for Cincinnati, but might be the wrong fit for a new regime coming in, trying to really be conscientious of the players that they bring into the fray. Jalen Armour-Davis, I believe the Dolphins put a waiver claim in for at the beginning of the year last year and lost out to Tennessee. He set down to be a free agent. I could see him profiling in a way in which could appeal to Jeff Hafley as well. I don't think that'll be a budget-busting signing by any means. And then you've got names like Joshua Williams from Kansas City. You've got Monteric Brown from the Jags, I think is a really attractive name that I really liked when he was coming out of Arkansas. I think he's really combative. Now, he doesn't run fast, right? He's like a 4.6 guy. But if you're looking for a guy that'll tackle, that'll play special teams, that'll come and compete for a starting job, he played 67% of the snaps for the Jags last year. And I was surprised he went as late as he did, but he's a corner that ran 4.6. So he got punished in the pre-draft process for that. But I would put him up near the top of names that I would want to bring in and give a chance to try to compete, because I think he's a great player. I think he's got a chip on his shoulder. I think he'd really aspire to come in and try to win a starting job. And his DC last year, Anthony Campanile, was with the Packers the year before. So they'll have a chance to kind of have a gauge with him that goes a little bit deeper than superficial, which is always what you want when you're bringing guys from outside the building, right? You get any older than this, now you're into the 28-year-olds. Maybe Nashawn Wright from the Bears, who was a starter, 28 years old. Seemed like he kind of caught lightning in a bottle, but super long guy. He was a former top 100 pick by the Cowboys out of Oregon State, had like 34-inch arms, was crazy long. Jalen Watson with the Chiefs has played a lot of football. Kobe Durant with the Rams. Maybe not the size profile, but he could play inside and outside. I think he's another name that the Dolphins past regime had some interest with in exploring acquisition avenues with. But you're kind of pushing the payoff window, because corners, usually that age that comes fast and hard for those guys is 30, right? And there's exceptions to the rule. There's exceptions to the rule everywhere. But by and large, you get past 28 or 20, you get past 27, you're looking at maybe like a 1 or 2 year window, which is kind of a tough spot to be for Kader Kohu, because he's in this bucket. So I know I'm throwing a lot of names out. I kind of bypassed over Reek Woolen. I suspect his spending ceiling is going to be far out of what the Dolphins are in the window for, but he's another guy in the 27-year-old bucket. Don't expect a lot of sexy names that household names, multi-year starters in other places, because those guys are going to hit the open market, and there's some teams that have more cap space than they're going to know what to do with. And that's not the end of the pool we want the Dolphins to play in. So who are the role players who could be primed for something more and are built of the right things, and also are at an age and cost intersection that makes sense for where this team is at to be cost effective now with a potential long-term payoff? That's kind of the psychology I have when I'm looking at free agents for the Dolphins this year. So I'm getting down into the 29s, and it's, Jack Jones is in this bucket. Jamarcus Ingram is a nickel guy, although he's an exclusive rights free agent, so probably not. Rock Ya-Sin is a 30-year-old. Adoree Jackson, Chidobe Awuzie, Rasul Douglas. Like, these guys are kind of out the other end of where it's going to make sense for the Dolphins. So to kind of consider these shows as kind of the primer as we do the work towards and build up to the offseason blueprint. It's kind of whittling the list for names that I really like. So I'm attracted to names and would be interested in price gauging on guys like Greg Newsome, Roger McCreary, Martin Emerson, Cordell Flott, Kyer Elam, Eric Stokes, Jalen Armour Davis, Monteric Brown, Nashawn Wright would be the names that I would have circled to try to see where their market's at and see if there's anything that makes sense. And the Dolphins could swing on and potentially find a starter at corner. So that's cornerback. But I think with all the young guys that they have and then the opportunities in the draft and what the draft class is at corner, like, I'm not going crazy. I'm not going buck wild bringing in 4 guys in free agency at corner. I wouldn't. What about safety? I'm going to talk about that next. Make sure you guys stick with us. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important fit is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I were to hire somebody for this show, I'd go straight to Indeed, be very specific for what I need from a shorts production standpoint, a producer standpoint, a distribution standpoint, you name it. And get really experienced and not just resume buzzwords. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results by using Indeed. Sponsored jobs listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions do apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Any names at safety on the over-the-cap casualty list? Minkah Fitzpatrick's included on this list with the $15.6 million budget that he's owed. I think if the Dolphins were going to move on from Minkah, I do not think they would have a hard time finding a trade partner because I think the play was that good. Brandon Jones, I'd be surprised. Jeremy Chin with the Raiders, I think that's a pretty decent bet just because he's owed $7.5 million. And they had a whole sweeping change, just like Minkah. I don't think Chin has the same trade value appeal. Xavier Woods, Will Harris, Malik Hooker, not really anybody that really grabs my attention and gets me up my chair and says, oh, like that could be a home run. There are some players, though. I'll be interested in safety's always a weird position group to kind of nail down, like where are these guys going to get valued, right? Because it is generally position teams generally don't pay tons and tons for unless you have supreme amounts of versatility. And versatility, as we just got done talking about, is kind of like a marquee thing for what the Packers did with their safety room. But this is a good safety class. So from that standpoint, I think it's a good natural qualifier to say I wouldn't spend irresponsibly on anybody off this list. Now, there are some players that I get really excited about. I think it's much more likely because it's not a premium position that the Dolphins could find somebody. Like we had Julian Blackmon. I've given to the Dolphins the last 2 years in the offseason blueprint. And he signed 1-year deals for like less than $3 million and then just signed a contract extension because he played well. It's like, yeah, why was this guy continuously out there on the open market? Because he could play well. Now, he wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the most powerful hitter, but he had good football IQ and good versatility. And lo and behold, he finally gets a contract extension and is going to avoid hitting free agency after having effectively no market the last 2 years. It's kind of, safeties are kind of weird. So I'll go through some names that have my attention while acknowledging like Nick Cross from the Colts, former fringe top 100 pick out of Maryland, 25 years old. He played 95% of the snaps last year. He's somebody I'd be interested in. Is he going to get the $10 million valuation? Is he going to get the $6 million valuation? Is he going to get the $3.5 million valuation? Like, it's impossible to say with safeties, but he's a name that is of interest to me. And I wouldn't be signing any of these safeties for like $6 million a year. I'm looking for $4 million and down. Right? That's the challenge. That's what we have to be ready to explore and find. Dane Belton with the Giants. He was formerly of Iowa. The Bucks have Christian Izine, who's a restricted free agent, so he probably won't hit the market. Geno Stone with the Bengals, formerly of the Ravens. Cam Curl with the Rams. He's turned into a nice player. He went over there from being in Washington before that. I think Reed Blankenship with the Eagles would make a ton of sense. I loved Reed coming out of Middle Tennessee State. And he went to Philadelphia and has been excellent as a piece of their secondary that can play on the second level. He's not a great nickel guy, but he can play half and he can play low. So he's got middle of the core flexibility. He doesn't really have the play out in the nickel flexibility. What's Brian Cook going to get from the Chiefs? Are the Seahawks going to bring back Kobe Bryant out of Cincinnati, was a mid-round draft pick, had 4 picks this year? Like these names are all interesting to me at safety. You get past this point, and Blackman signed with the Saints and got his contract extension there. As is just a footnote. You get past the Brian Cooks and the Kobe Bryants, and now you're into the 28-year-old plus bucket. You know, those guys are all, I just mentioned, are all 27 or younger. So with safeties, how high do you want to go? Now they've got a little bit more runway to age gracefully because they're not playing in isolation on the perimeter, like playing basketball one-on-ones in grass with cleats, playing backwards all the time. There's more opportunities to play with leverage and play deeper so you could see more of the field and let your instincts take over. And you got to fit the run a little bit more, but you don't need to be as dynamic of an athlete in space. So I see names like Jalen Thompson with the Cardinals, although he's constantly been paid big dollars. Like his last contract had $20 million in guarantees. I see Aloy Gilman, who was traded from the Chargers to the Ravens. His last contract was $5 million a year on the annual average, and he's 29. But like, I think he's a potential quality starter. Well, he turned into a really good player the last couple of years for the Chargers before he got traded to the Ravens. I cannot believe it feels like just yesterday Kyle Duggar was drafted, and he's 30 years old. This will be his age 30 season in this bucket. Same for Mike Edwards with the Chiefs. So I think you're at this point, you're probably past a lot of names that would really perk me up in my chair. So my whittling of the short list at safety, I'll go of names I'm interested in, but at a cost qualifying threshold. Like if you're going to get marketed or marked above this, it's just not going to happen for the Dolphins this year. Nick Cross, Dane Belton, Geno Stone, Cam Curl, Reed Blankenship, Brian Cook, Kobe Bryant, Jalen Thompson, Aloy Gilman. So some names, right? What's the dollar amount? But it gives you a pretty healthy look. And then, like, I'm definitely drafting a safety somewhere. I don't know if it's at 11 with Caleb Downs. I don't know if it's 43 with the kid from Toledo, McNeil Thompson. I don't know if it's at 75 with AJ Halsey from LSU or somebody else, or Zakee Wheatley from Penn State. It's a very good, like, there's probably a dozen safeties that I look at in this year's class and say, give me one. Now, do you keep Minkah and sign somebody like this at the $4 million or under threshold and then draft a guy? I'd feel pretty good about the safety room relative to what it was last year. Now, you got young players that got to step in. The implementation of that's going to take time. But this room, I think, is fairly doable because of the economics of the position. We're going to do some more free agent primers. The rest of the way, we'll react to any news we get this week as well. Kyle Krabs, you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your Monday. Congrats to the Hawks. Better luck next time, Pats. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.